Going back here a moment, he says, I'm going down through here very quickly. Man will learn to face the crisis of life in terms of his knowledge and their naturalness and probability. Reasonableness. Manly attitudes will be fostered by education and supported by custom. Goes on here, believing that religion must work increasingly for joy in living. Religious humanists aim to foster the creative in man, to encourage achievements that add to the satisfactions of life. Religious humanism maintains that all associations and institutions exist for the fulfillment of human life. And so it's a view to the enhancement of human life as the purpose and program of humanism. So some of the people that signed that at that particular time, let me give you some of their names. I mentioned to you a guy by the name of R. Lester Mondale, right? You remember a fellow by the name of John Dewey. You ever heard of John Dewey? He is the, quote, father of the education movement in this country right now. So now he is a signer of this particular document. So this is part of the reason why schools today, and again, this is where we are in our country, this is part of the reason why so many schools today push the evolutionary agenda. But you think about every other thing that they push in all of this. It also stems from this idea, look, we are men, we are the part of evolution. It is our job to push evolution that much further. Now, what they have the idea that it's going to turn out to be, they have no idea. We've got to push human knowledge and everything even that much further. So we have no need of a God. We have no need of worship. We have no need of the things that we're used to, that we're talking about in the idea of Christianity. And so you see that Dewey and Dewey's ideas have infected and, in fact, invaded the whole education society in America. So this is the reason why, and I was reading today on various places, again, these arguments and debates over transgenderism and what students should be allowed to do in certain schools. You know, boys go into girls' bathrooms because they identify as a girl. You see, this is the kind of stuff, this is where the seeds of this was planted. Now, in 1973, now this was 40 years later, what happened between 1933 and 1973? World War II, all righty, World War II, and the situation in Korea, and the situation in Vietnam, but we were slowly pulling out of Vietnam by 1973, right? The biggest part of it was from 68 to, we sent advisors over there, I think, as early as 61 or 62, 63. And then they actually started winding everybody down about 68, 69, 70, right? So in 1973, here's what they said. And I'm quoting to you again. Here's the idea. And listen to what they say in this respect. They said, first off, they said this. This was the introduction. The next century can be and should be the humanistic century. Dramatic, scientific, technological, and ever-accelerating social and political changes crowd our awareness. We have virtually conquered the planet, explored the moon, overcome the limits of travel and communication. We stand at the dawn of a new age. Using technology wisely, we can control our environment, okay? Conquer poverty, markedly reduce disease, extend our lifespan, significantly modify our behavior, alter the course of human evolution, and cultural development, unlocks vast new powers and provide humankind with unparalleled opportunity for achieving an abundant and meaningful life. But this is filled with dangers. In learning to apply the scientific method to nature and human life, we've opened the door to ecological damage, overpopulation, dehumanizing institution, totalitarian repression, nuclear and biochemical disaster. Faced with apocalyptic prophecies and doomsday scenario, many flee in despair from reason and embrace irrational cults and theories of withdrawal and retreat. Traditional moral codes and newer irrational cults fail to meet the pressing needs of today and tomorrow. False theologies of hope and messianic ideologies, substituting new dogmas for old, cannot cope with existing world realities. They separate rather than unite. So he goes on to talk about the idea that The humanist outlook will tap the creativity of each human being and provide the courage and vision for us to work together. Sounds good, doesn't it? So he goes on. Now, here's the things they say about religion now. Religion may inspire dedication to the highest ethical ideas. But what ethical ideas? Their specific ethical ideas, right? So, the cultivation of moral devotion and creative imagination is expression of genuine spiritual experience and aspiration. We believe, however, that traditional dogmatic or authoritarian religions that replace revelation, God, ritual, or creed above human needs and experience do a disservice to the human species. Now, this is what they were writing in 1973. Okay? Even at this late date in human history, certain elementary facts based upon the critical use of scientific reason have to be restated. We find insufficient evidence for belief in the existence of the supernatural. It is either meaningless or irrelevant to the question of survival and fulfillment of the human race. As non-theists, they don't call themselves atheists, but non-theists, what do they say? We begin with humans, not God. Nature, not deity. We got here by accident? Nature. Gaia is the goddess that we need to serve. Now, go back and look back at some of the cartoons about the 1970s, 1980s. There were a lot of cartoons with these superheroes, but one of the superheroes was Gaia, the earth goddess. And our children were watching this. And you see how they're sliding stuff like this in the media and everything along that line. He goes on. They said, listen, some humanists believe we should reinterpret traditional religions and reinvest them with meaning appropriate to the current situation. But they said this perpetuates the ideal of dependency and escapism. And again, it impedes the free use of the intellect. We want radically new human purposes and goals. The promises of immortal salvation or fear of eternal damnation are illusory and harmful. They distract humans from present concerns, from self-actualization and rectifying social injustice. Modern science discredits such historic concepts as the ghost in the machine and the separable soul. All right? Traditional religions are surely not the only obstacles to human progress. You hear now they're getting even a little bit more bold, right? Other ideologies, authoritarianism, when they sacrifice the individuals on the altar of utopian promises. In other words, if you do this, then boy, life will be better. So let's just sacrifice some people along the way to do that, right? All humans undoubtedly need economic and political goals. They need creative values by which to live. Moral values derive their source from human experience. There's their point. Ethics is autonomous and situational, needing no theological or ideological sanction. So this again is being taught in schools, colleges, all right, and emphasized. Reason and intelligence are the most effective instruments that humankind possesses. They now talk about the individual. Fifth, the preciousness and dignity of the individual person is a central humanist value. Individuals should be encouraged to realize their own creative talents. Sixth, in the area of sexuality, we believe that intolerant attitudes, often cultivated by Orthodox religions and puritanical cultures, unduly repress sexual conduct. The right to birth control, abortion, and divorce should be recognized. While we do not approve of exploitative, denigrating forms of sexual expression, neither do we wish to prohibit sexual behavior between consenting adults. Okay. Democratic society. You have to have a full range of civil liberties in all society. So this includes freedom of speech in the press, political democracy, the legal right of opposition to governmental policies, religious liberty, freedom of association, artistic, scientific, and cultural. It includes the recognition of an individual's right to die with dignity, euthanasia, and the right to suicide. We oppose the increasing invasion of privacy by whatever means in totalitarian and democratic societies. We're committed to an open and democratic society. Uh, I'm just hitting the highlights of this, okay? The elimination of all discrimination based upon race, religion, sex, age, or national origin. All righty? I want to encourage you to look this up. You can look this up yourself. I'm not going to read the whole document. I'm just, it's kind of a utopian idea, but it also brings out this. This world community must renounce the resort to violence and force as a means of solving international disputes. Okay? Sounds good. Problem is what? We're humans. And by and large, we're not going to do that, right? He talks about the community and must engage in cooperative planning concerning the use of rapidly depleting resources. The planet Earth must be considered a single ecosystem. Ecological damage, resource depletion, and excessive population growth must be checked by international concord. All right, how are you going to control population growth? We'll get the United Nations to help us work that one out. Okay? The problems of economic growth and development can no longer resolved by one nation alone. They are worldwide in scope. So we have to have some sort of a international authority that safeguards human rights, massive technical, agricultural, medical, and economic assistance, including both control techniques. Why? Because you've got to control the population growth, because we don't want to get so much that we don't have enough resources to feed the world, right? Technology is the vital key to human progress. And we must expand communication and transportation across frontiers. Travel restrictions must cease. And as you're going through there, I mean, you go through this destructive ideological differences among communism, capitalism, socialism, conservatism, liberalism should be overcome. It's a utopian world. It's a world that think they can happen, but it's us solving it ourselves. Now, some of the people that signed this one, how many of you have ever heard of Isaac Asimov? Okay, he signed this. The Lester Mondale I was talking about earlier, he signed it. And again, I just want you to see some of the folks here that signed it and where this stuff is coming from and a lot of this stuff. Finally, in 2004, they come up with a Humanistic Manifesto 3. They don't, in that particular situation, they don't really sit down the details in Humanist Manifesto 1 and 2. They just said, we need to continue to work toward doing this. That's kind of what it boiled down to in Humanist Manifesto 3. So, when you have the media, when you have the education system, when you have the government, all working toward these goals, what's going to wind up happening? Huh? No religious ideas, no religion ideas, and so like everything like that. So that's where a lot of the conflicts are coming from. That's why we're having these discussions. That's why we're discussing these whole ideas of abortion and infanticide and euthanasia. And again, these things have found their way, and our children are being taught it in classes all the time. Is starting younger and younger and younger. So again, we talked a lot about abortion. I'm getting back to this infanticide now on page 161, so forth. The idea of infanticide, again, I didn't spend a lot of time on this, but I did kind of briefly go over it quickly last week. Wanted to spend some key in on some important thing here. And the idea that some people have of what we call passive infanticide. Once a baby is born, and we don't want that baby to live, we will not give that baby any nourishment or anything like that and just let it die. That's passive. You know, we're not actually causing that baby to die, but what are we doing? We're causing that baby to die because we're not taking care of that baby. So again, and this happens a lot of times or sometimes with deformed babies, handicapped infants who die without food, water, or treatment. Others receive a do not resuscitate order, okay? Active euthanasia, not only do you have the situation where you have them being aborted, but now you also have it where sometimes when a baby is born, that baby is drowned to death or suffocated. And again, today in the world, you think about some of these women, and I mentioned last week, and I want to emphasize again, we need to again be very concerned about these women that are in these situations. And again, they wound up having the baby, throwing it in a trash bag. I think it was not too long ago we saw one or heard of the situation here in Georgia where they found a baby on the side of a road in a plastic bag, and the baby was crying. Somebody just walked along, picked it up. There it was, but the baby was thrown away. There have been numerous cases of botched abortion that resulted in a live baby. And again, they would kill the baby at that point in time. Imperiled, the ideal is the argument for this is because, imperiled. Now, what do we mean by imperiled children? Those are the ones that have an impairment that will cause death if not immediately treated. So if a baby has a hole in its heart, you don't immediately, think about it. In a few short moments, whenever you find that the baby's having a problem, a blue baby, you will do all these tests to find out what's going on. It may have a hole in its heart and needs immediate surgery. Well, according to what we're talking about right here, what they're wanting to do is now it's up to the mother and also everybody else involved. Okay, what are we going to do? And if the mother wants the baby, let's make whatever point necessary. But if not, then what? Let the baby pass away. And their arguments is again, down on page 161, they are human beings, but they're not persons in full sense of the term. So a person is somebody that obviously can take care of himself. This is a very important argument when it comes to the ideal of euthanasia. When people grow older and they have to have somebody to help them all the time, then if you use the argument that they have to be able to be a person, they have to be able to take care of themselves, then whenever they can't take care of themselves anymore, then what we can euthanize them, right? They talk about the ideal of the quality of the life of a child. And again, we've talked about this ideal of the quality of life arguments. What would you consider to be the quality of life arguments? A lot of these are very subjective. There's no objective normal. Now, the objective might be you take care of the child, you feed him, and all this other stuff, and you take care of these people and so forth. Where did we get the idea that you take care of the baby? Where do you get the idea that we take care of those that are older? Again, not from humanistic ideas, not from ideas that take God out of the picture, but from God. And the reason why we say that is because God, we read in Scripture, is the one who gives us life. And therefore, we cannot put ourselves in the place of God to decide whose life should be taken and whose life shouldn't. This is exactly what Hitler did. It was interesting, I did not read it, but in this 1973 version of the Humanist Manifesto, they admitted the problems that had happened in the world since that time. And they said, you know what, humanity has really not gotten any better since 1933, even though we put that out there. So the bottom line is he admitted the fact that there was a lot of things, and they actually, in this document in 1973, condemned Hitler and Nazism. But if you really start thinking about taking their conclusions to their logical extremes, or taking their ideas to their logical conclusions, then what? They have to admit that Hitler was on the right track. The quality of the life of the caregivers. Now, this is another argument. They said, well, if the child doesn't have a certain quality of life, it's more merciful to kill a child in this condition than it is to allow them to suffer. If the caregivers can't take on them, then for the quality, so as not to infringe upon the parents, the community, the government, and the medical field, then it's more merciful to kill a child, right? That's where their arguments are. So you got to think about the caregivers. Now, what are some of the responses? Parental right to make decisions can be overridden if the decision is in conflict with a higher fundamental right. So if the parents' the choice severely endangers the health of a child, their rights can be overridden. It happens all the time. It's called putting family or putting children in defects, right? And I mentioned this very briefly last time. It's argued that physicians and the legal system have a duty to override the parental decisions in such cases. All right? Yes.
When you say quality of life, that means it is subjective because
right.
To different people mean different things.
Right.
I mean, different people are on certain income, some people are middle class, some people are
right.
working class, and those kinds of things. And I know when I was growing up, my dad worked for the railroad. In Alabama, and us kids, thought, you know what I really want, what I wanted back then?
What was that?
All I wanted was a television in the living room
Mm-hmm.
so I could watch a long way.
Right, right.
Those kinds of things. I wasn't thinking about, you know, I was this person on the other side of town.
Right.
You know, or how much money they had. I knew my dad had a house. We had a yard. He had a lot. He had a garden. You know, so he could provide everything that I thought he needed.
That's right. That's
as
right.
a parent. And of course, my mother had passed when I was like 10. But my dad stayed with his family.
Mm-hmm.
He kept all those children together, sent us to school, provided food,
Right.
all those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I really was kind of, I was a happy kid when I was growing up. Because I had TV. Now, our only problem with that is when the TV broke down.
Life was miserable, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I started complaining. I started complaining to my dad. I said, Dad, I want a TV. I was the oldest child.
Yeah.
I would say, Dad, I want a TV.
Mm-hmm.
I want a TV. I want a TV.
Mm-hmm.
No, he didn't go and book my breakfast boy shit up. Oh, he didn't do that. He waited a few days, went to the finance company, and got the TV on time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but he got TV for all us. We
Right.
were all happy.
Yeah.
We could play, you know, in our community.
Right.
And but that's my type of quality.
And you see, you know, you grew up in an earlier age where if you had a food, clothing, and shelter, you were very happy.
Mm-hmm.
A TV was a perk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, we're living in a culture where our young people are being, and they're showing even more and more the dangers of that. Our young people from 2 to 3 years old, you know, let's keep the baby quiet. How? Let them play with the iPad. Let them play with, you know, the iPhone, watch their videos and so forth. And you take their video away from them. Man, it's like you cut off their arm. You know, again, these are some things that we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. There is no standard for the quality of life. If we would sit back and say, what did the Constitution and Declaration of Independence says? We have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That might be the quality and the standard of life, okay? The objective standard. Life, but life's given to us by God. So I need to do whatever I need to do to make sure I have that life and maintain that life. Liberty, freedom, yeah. Again, think about how many countries today don't have that. And the pursuit of happiness. Now, some people are going to be happy with a brand new Dodge Charger in their driveway. You know, me, I'd be happy with an old beat up pickup truck. You see, quality of life. That's all. It depends on what you want, what you desire, what you need. So you did make a very good argument there, and that's the whole point that he's trying to make here. This, again, is a very, very subjective situation, the quality of life. We can think about, again, the idea of, you know, third, these babies are still human beings and the moral rights of a human being. So the right to life promised in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence should be something that we still defend, right? But again, the reason why we're having all of these discussions is because we've gotten away from that. The Constitution, as well as the Declaration of Independence, much of it was, we know that Thomas Jefferson was very instrumental in both of them, right? We also know that he was a deist. He had a Bible and he cut out the Bible passages that he didn't agree with because he did not believe that a God would actually intervene in the affairs of mankind. But at least he still thought that there was a God that man are amenable to. So we've gotten away from this, again, coming to this kind of stuff. So now we're not answerable to any God. We are only answerable to ourselves. Okay, who? Is it the guy who makes laws? That's scary. Because if it's the guys who make laws, the ladies and gentlemen who make laws, they can make any law they want to, right? And we are amenable to it. And that's where the problems are. That's where the problems begin. But see, we're amenable to somebody besides that, and that's to God. Okay?
Seems like the answer to the majority rule.
Right. And have the majority ever been wrong? Yes, on numerous occasions. So there's where the problems come in. If the imperiled child is a human person, it would be infanticide to withhold treatment of the child if a known medical intervention could fix the problem. Again, they're humans. So what's had to happen is we've had to do a disconnect in our society and say, well, they're not really human beings. They're just what? Blobs of tissue, fetuses. That's what we call them, all these things, in an effort to, I guess you might say, for lack of a better term, in an effort to dehumanize them. And if we dehumanize them, then we can justify the taking of their lives. There's a distinction between being a human being, and they say, well, there's a distinction between being a human being and functioning as a human being. Okay? The view that imperiled children are non-persons because it errs because actions determine, since it believes that actions determine essence instead of the essence determining the actions. And what does that mean? A baby is not really going to be really a human being until such time as they are providing something for the whole human race. And that's going to have to be coming down the line some other way, right? So they're trying to make an argument between being human and then functioning as a human. I'm on page 163 now. I'm trying to rock and roll pretty quick here through here. All righty. All righty. Killing a sufferer is not an act of mercy, all right? Number one, when we start, and again, think about this with regards to infanticide, but especially euthanasia. Again, we define quality of life very vaguely. It's subjective. Quality of life to an atheist is going to be something totally different than a quality of life to a Christian, right? That's it. So again, there needs to be a universal criterion for the quality of life. Now, for that to happen, we need God. God has given us a criteria. It's found in His Word, is it not? So again, think about that. There are many people who are suffering that are not in a sufficiently healthy emotional state to make a proper decision about their condition, right? When you're in pain, sometimes all you want to do is be out of the pain. And so a lot of times, again, when you go through cancer treatments, or when you go and it's just dragging every resource in your body down, after a while you just say, I just want to die. I just want it over with. Many people determine the quality of life from personal subjective experience. We've talked about that. And it goes back to what you were saying, brother. A person in a third world country is different from a person in the country that we live in. Again, they're wanting shelter, food, and clothing, right? And they, a lot of times, are very happy simply because somebody gives them used tennis shoes, right? You come over here to the United States and try to give used tennis shoes to somebody, right? And it's like, no, I want that $150 pair over there in Reebok land, or where, you know what I'm trying to say there. Okay? It also argues the idea that no moral good can result. The idea would bring out, well, it's going to ease suffering. There's a lot of good moral things that come out of suffering. Suffering causes us to value our lives. It causes us to value our families. It causes us to put our perspective where it needs to be. It's not in things. It's in people. It's in the people that we have relationship with. Paul would say, or the Hebrew writer would say in Hebrews 12:11, no chastening for the present time is joyous, but grievous, but it brings forth the peaceable fruits of righteousness, right? That those that are exercised. Job learned some things. All right? The quality of life does not take precedence over the sanctity of life. Life is a gift of God. He says, I have the right to take it. The Lord, Job would say in Job 121, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. What? Blessed be the name of the Lord. So again, allowing unavoidable suffering is better than killing the sufferer. That's sometimes the only way we're ever going to learn something. It is not merciful to kill another person to relieve my burdens. If I'm having to take care of, if my wife has a stroke, it's going to be a burden upon me to take care of her, right? That's going to be a natural part of it. But it doesn't, I'm not going to seek to have her mercy killed or put out of the way, to make it easier for me. Again, this falls under very subjective ideas. Again, you think about that idea, we have a duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Suffering children fall into this category. If it is acceptable to kill a child just because they're a burden, then again, one could argue that nearly any child, anytime, could be a burden. That's really true when they become teenagers. Right? Whenever you're going through everything that they're going through. So again, that would, and of course we would say, no, that's not right. That's not right. So the arguments against infanticide are the very same arguments that we make about euthanasia. Euthanasia means, it comes from the Greek word euthanatos, which means good death or happy death. All right, that's the idea there. There's active euthanasia, where again, we purposefully are withholding food and water from the person that is about to die or is dying. If we were taking a life, or there is the ideal of passive. And again, I think I talked about this very briefly in the last thing, talked about the idea that, some people have gotten to the point where they've lived their lives, they want to die, and their body shuts down for them. They're not eating as much, they're not drinking as much, they're getting to that point. So you see, in that situation, it's more of a passive euthanasia in that what? They've made some decisions that they want to get out. They want to be off from this mortal coil and not have to suffer anymore. So also at that particular time, the body begins to shut down, and it can happen over a period of time. Now, according to them, remember what I just read you about the Humanist Manifesto. They said that men have the right to die with dignity. Okay, now who's going to, what is that idea? They say dying a slow, merciless, painful death is not a dignified death. So the bottom line is that somebody has cancer, and finally the doctor says, we've done all we could do. Well, then give her an overdose of morphine, give him an overdose of something else, and go ahead and kill him, put him out of his misery. No, that's not that we don't have the right to do that. Again, supposedly the arguments for this is the right of privacy includes death with dignity. Remember I talked to you last week about the 14th Amendment and the Supreme Court justice that argued that implied in that amendment was the right to privacy, right? Implied. It doesn't actually say it, but that was the argument they made that guaranteed a woman's right to have an unborn baby put to death. But if that's the case, what about, who has the right to decide who lives and who has the right to decide who dies? Well, we're trying to just be merciful to the sufferer. And a lot of times we'll say, we put a dog down when the dog gets older, right? What's the difference? We're human beings. God says that we're higher than the animals, right? He put us, Genesis chapter 1, in charge of the animals, in charge of the world. We've blown it, but interestingly enough, he still commits it to our care. After you find the situation with Noah again is told, and you think about that, the whole world was destroyed except for Noah and his family, and he says, you go back out and you tend the world, right? We haven't done that well. Now, and the thing that I want to challenge us with, and this goes back to the idea of ecology and things along that line, we do have the responsibility, and I don't think we do enough teaching about that in the Lord's church, but we do have a responsibility to take care of what God's given us. And that includes our planet. And so again, we need to be thinking about that a little bit more. In 1983, the Supreme Court of Indiana agreed with the defenders of the decision, and they allowed a baby to die to starve to death. Because this baby was what? It was an act of mercy to this suffering baby. It relieves the family of financial burdens. Have you noticed something else that's going on in this country over the last few years? Now, I vaguely remember it. I don't remember it obviously back earlier, but I remember whenever we went to the doctor, we had one doctor that treated us for just about everything, right? And the bottom line is, when we went, it cost money, but we usually, by and large, we didn't have insurance. We just pay for it, pay as you go, right? And that was the situation. We had a surgery, then we had to make arrangements with the hospital to have the surgery. Then insurance got involved. We got people, well, if you buy this insurance, we'll help pay your bills. Then the attorneys got involved. Well, you know, now that these doctors are doing this, they now can be sued for malpractice. Look, everybody's going to make mistakes. Doctors make mistakes. They're human beings. Okay? Sometimes, you know, sometimes the mistakes I make may lead in death, right? If I'm leaving this place tonight and going home, and I pull out in front of a car, and that car hits me and kills me, I've made a mistake, and I've had to deal with the consequences of that mistake, right? And it's sad if that other person gets hurt too. But the thing is most of the time we don't make life and death decisions like doctors have to. They put themselves and allow themselves to be put in that situation. But now they make these bad decisions. And I think it's another one of those situations where we talk about the doctors that are making these bad decisions. And we can actually notice cases over and over and over and over again of that. And then we start lumping all of them in with these doctors that make these bad decisions. So now they have to pay for what? They have to pay for more money for malpractice. Now what happens? Well, for that to happen, you now have the insurance company again dictating to the doctor what he can and can't do. He's got to follow certain medical protocols, even when he knows that maybe he can't and shouldn't do that. So who's running the whole show now? It's not the doctors, it's the insurance company and the lawyers, right? Folks that are not making those life and death decisions every day. And so what winds up happening is we're now in a situation where, you know, I think I shared with you before, but last year about this time, it was October 29th, I was cutting a limb down and a limb knocked me out and I fell and I broke my back in 3 places. That little bitty thing right there cost close to $13,000. With all, and again, what did I get? I had about 5 hours in an emergency room, a bunch of x-rays, some MRIs. I went to see a neurologist, not a neurologist, a neurosurgeon. And whenever we finally totaled everything up, and I would tell them, look, I'm self-pay, they cut off a lot. I mean, you would be amazed at how much they cut down because of that. You know, because they knew that they would get the money somehow or some way or another. And the bottom line is, but it still wound up costing about $12,000 to $13,000. It's amazing. Now, I didn't have surgery. I wasn't in the hospital for maybe 3 or 4 hours. When I saw the doctor, the neurosurgeon, in the 2 times I saw that doctor, I wasn't in there more than a minute and a half, both times. In other words, the first time he did spend time explaining it to me. The second time he said, you're doing okay. I want you to come back in 3 months. And I said, tell you what, if I need to come back, I'll come back. I'm not going to spend you another $300 plus money, you know what I'm saying, for another minute of your time. Okay, I know your time is very precious, but that money's a little bit more precious to me. Okay, you see, the bottom line is you see how all this has begun, and now this is the reason why medical costs are so high. You don't even want to go see a doctor nowadays because of how much it's going to cost. And drug companies and pharmacies, well, they're just making money hand over fist, yeah, because they're now getting sued if their product creates greater harm. So now they have to pay exorbitant money to insurance companies, right? So you see, we've allowed ourselves to get into the situation. And it does become a heavy financial strain. Think about as well, in another respect, it's gotten to the point, and I've shared this with you before, but the idea that when a person dies, it now costs anywhere from $10,000 to $12,000 to bury somebody. You can get a cremation for about $1,600. I remember not too long ago, you can get a cremation for about $600. The point is you see what's happening is because of all these things happening, it starts creating financial problems. It's created a great burden. A lot of times people, taking care of the suffering does increase. Think about the amount of money that goes into nursing homes. Taking care of those folks that they can't do anything. And again, I don't know how life's going to working out for me, but the thing is, the burden of caring for the suffering increases. And so the ideal is that what? It would just be better all the way around if we just didn't have nursing homes anymore, that we just go ahead and commit euthanasia, put them out of our misery as well as their own misery. Kind of like what? When a horse is in a burning barn, shoot the horse, let him die so he don't have to suffer. But you see, that's putting us on the same level as an animal, not in the level that God has given us. And so, and again, I hope you begin to see as we're looking through all of this, that what goes back to, it goes back to these evolutionary ideas. If we're nothing more than an animal, then why should society have to pay to help take care of us? This is where it's going. The moment, and I mentioned this time a couple of weeks ago as well as last week, but the idea that one part of the human race does not have a right to life, i.e. the unborn, that is just a very small step to start saying there's other people that don't have a right to life. And that was exactly the argument that Hitler made and Stalin's made and all these other dictators have made that have killed multiplied millions of people. All right? And then there's that idea that everybody has the right to make their own decisions in all areas and aspects of life. Okay? A lot of times, though, when you start thinking about it, when you go back to this humanist idea, we can't make decisions for what we think's best for us, but I've got to be thinking about the whole community. Now, there's something to be said about that. The church is a community. And we need to understand that we have the responsibility to encourage and uplift one another, right? To be there for one another. That's biblical. Love one another, encourage one another, exhort one another, rebuke one another. Those are real things that we need to be doing. And in a community where there is love, loving one another, that should be practiced. But in a community in like society, trying to dictate who does what when, because by their own subjective ideas, that becomes a whole other issue, does it not? So again, they say in essence that a people have an autonomous right to make their own decisions in all areas and aspects of life, but they won't give that right to the unborn child. Well, it can't make a decision. And now, as I said, they're arguing about at what point does an unborn child actually become human. They're human the moment they were born. They were human the moment they were conceived. But they're not a person. You see how this thing is being played out. And so, when you start thinking about it, what's an evaluation? Number one, there is no moral right to kill an innocent human being. The Bible says you shall not kill. Jesus will emphasize that same idea. He says we are to love one another. Deuteronomy 32:39, I put to death and I bring to life. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Genesis 1:27, God created human life. He alone has the right to take it. So again, it's when God says I live or die. Number two, the Constitution gives no right to kill. In the 14th Amendment, where supposedly the right to privacy is implied, it's not clearly stated, then it is, it is the only ideal of it is not explicitly stated, therefore it's only implied. If you have an implied right to privacy, that does not take precedence over the emphatically stated right to life in the 5th and 14th Amendment. So, the idea is it's not merciful, number three, to kill a sufferer. Okay? Killing an unborn human does not avoid child abuse. It's abuse of the worst kind. Killing a deformed infant and suffering adults does not avoid human misery. It inflicts the misery of death. We can learn a lot through suffering. Look at Job. I can belabor that point for a while, but number four, there's no price tag for a human life. Jesus says, what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and what? Lose his own soul. The soul is who he is, right? So there's what we're talking about. And again, we can get into those discussions. The end does not justify the means. And again, the ideal of autonomy, the ideal of self-government. Just for those considering suicide or using euthanasia are not hurting anybody else, but that does not relieve them from the moral obligation not to hurt any person, including themselves. Right? You see what I'm trying to say? Well, they're not hurting anybody. Yeah, they are. They're hurting themselves. They're hurting themselves. All right? People have certain right to their own bodies, but this doesn't mean that they have the right to do anything they want to do with their own body. Right? Just because you have the unalienable right to life in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence do not mean you have the right to kill yourself when you want to. We call that self-murder. Right? In order for a person to have a right to die, it would be a natural right because no legal rights to die have ever been established. No legal rights to die have been established. So again, it talks about the unnatural passive euthanasia and natural passive euthanasia. Unnatural is whenever we are taking away sustaining life. Natural passive euthanasia is whenever we're deciding not to put somebody on a respirator, whenever all the efforts have been made. All right, suppose somebody's dying of lung cancer. They went through all the chemo treatments, all the radiation treatments. The doctor says there's nothing else they could do. And so the patient is there gasping for breath. And the family said, well, put him on a respirator. Well, he's about to die anyway. Putting him on the respirator is what? Only going to prolong the inevitable. And you see, that's what we're talking about. So what's wrong with this? God has the one in charge of life. It is contrary to the sanctity of human life. It is specifically condemned in Scripture, and again, it's based on that ideal of this humanistic ethic. If you're looking at page 173 now, I'm rocked and rolled here. I'm not going to cover all of these, You're reading this is what's important. I'm just trying to hit the highlights because we kind of talked about this a little bit last week. Humanist Manifesto 2 specifically recommended abortion, suicide, and euthanasia. Remember that? I read it to you. And again, you can look it up on the internet yourself and see what's going on there. So, how do you make those decisions? Is it wrong to allow somebody to die? You're a part of a family and your loved one is about to die. And let's kind of get the scenario here a little bit. Your loved one is in an automobile accident, all right? And they get in, and as you're talking to the doctor, it seems like things are getting better, okay? If we, at that point in time, then took him off a respirator or her off the respirator or something like that, things are getting better, the doctor seems to think everything's going to be okay, then if we allow them to, if we take them off that respirator, what are we doing? We may very well be killing them at that point in time, right? But they do all that they can. They've exhausted every effort. And then we demand that they put them on a respirator or a heart-lung machine or something like that. And that's not them anymore, is it? Brother?
I want to say, everybody, most people have a family of some kind. So it has to be somebody in that family to make a decision. The person can make a decision.
Right.
Somebody got to make the decision for them. That's how it usually goes.
Right.
The person can make their own decisions. Might not decide for you. A lot of families, I guess it depends on what a person's beliefs are, whether they're Christian or not, do they believe the Bible, and they value life,
right.
They value a person, they value their family members. So it's a kind of tough decision.
It is a tough decision.
It's not easy to decide. Me personally, and somebody in my family, they're not functioning like a normal human being, I still want them alive.
Right. Right.
But my person.
Right.
I want the person to stay alive. And I want to die naturally.
Till they die naturally.
You put them in the hospital, put them on a respirator.
Yeah.
They stay on that respirator. You can't afford it. I would.
Yeah.
I would not just, no.
But he also brings out the fact here on page 175, you keep a comatose person alive by a machine who has an incurable disease, they're dying, that's unnecessary. It's tough. And in fact, some people have viewed it as unethical because it opposes the very processes of natural mortality which God has ordained. It is appointed unto men once to what? We're all supposed to die. That's God's way. That's God's will. So again, we struggle with making those we struggle with making those decisions whenever, we decide whether or not to, quote, pull the plug. And again, life has become so mechanized that technology has created its own new morality, right? So again, what are some guidelines? Number one, the disease must be irreversible. So I'm diagnosed with lung cancer. All right. So if I'm going with lung cancer, all right, so I go through the treatments and do everything else I need to do. I get better for a while. But guess what? It comes back. And now it's not just in my lungs, but it's in my back. And it's also in my kidneys and in my liver. Now what's beginning to happen? Eventually, I don't care how many chemicals you put into that person's body, that cancer is going to win. And, so the disease must be irreversible. There comes points, and I'm talking about cancer. Think about a heart attack. The heart gets weakened, right? It's not pumping like it once did. So then they'll have another heart attack, or they'll have another heart attack, before long, the heart is just what? So and here's where we start making a lot of these other decisions. Well, maybe I can get a heart transplant. Guess what had to happen for you to get a heart transplant? Somebody else had to die, right? But also think about the ideal as this as well. And it's something to chew on. It's something to really meditate on. And I've given a lot of thought. I know somebody that there are a couple of people that had heart transplants. They did have, some of them, quality good lives later, up to about 10 or 12 years. But they're on this anti-rejection medicine. That's having impact on the body, along with everything else. Everything else from that point forward, it starts cascading down. Again, go back, don't look it up on the internet, but most people that have heart transplants only make it after they have the heart transplant another maybe good 10 to 15 years. Okay, well, that's 10 to 15 years. And there's something to be said about that, right? But again, you got that point where you sit back and say, well, nothing else can be done. So do you put them on a heart-lung machine just so you can come by, because they're going to be out of it the whole time? Just for them, just to please you because they're still alive? Are they really still alive? Think about that. We don't know that. What exactly happens at the point of death? We really don't know. We go to James 2, the body without the spirit is dead. At what point does the spirit depart the body? Ecclesiastes tells us the spirit goes back to God that made it. Well, how do we know when that happens? Well, we definitely know when that person physically dies, right? Are we trying to play God in this? So number one, the disease must be irreversible. Number two, the patient has veto power. If the patient decides, I don't want to be put through all of that, that's their option. But they also need to sit down and try to make the decision, again, based upon what their understanding of what God wants and what God expects, and what their family wants and what their family expects. And thirdly, it needs to be a collective decision. So he's making the point on page 176, you need to think about spiritually, legally, morally, all the family. You start talking to doctors, attorneys, family members, and again, talk to God. Talk to God. So what does dying mean? Dying means that it's irreversible. There's no known available medical means to correct the injury or disease. It's going to lead to death. There's no medical hope of a recovery. It's only a matter of time before a person dies. That's what dying is. That's what irreversible dying is. Again, what are unnatural means? Again, we continue to feed them. We continue to give them water. It may not even hurt in the fact that, intravenous might be good because it has a method of sustaining life. But again, there comes a point where, how long? How long? Well, is it unmerciful not to relieve death or pain by death? The Bible does talk about Proverbs 31. It talks about give strong drink to him who's perishing. Who is perishing? Why? And this was in the days before morphine and all this other stuff, okay? Give strong drink to him who is perishing and wine to those in bitter distress. Some people use this passage to justify drinking. Okay? If you're going to go down that road, then the only time you can drink it is when? You're dying. Okay? It's not going to help you then, is it? So there's it. But again, we know that drinking strong drink that causes drunkenness is sin. So we obviously can't do that. So again, and there's a lot of things. Well, what if the pain relievers hasten the death? I shared with you last week about my mother-in-law, morphine she had. It may have, I don't know. But the reality is it's a struggle. It's a struggle to make these kind of decisions. Euthanasia, if you want to call it this, passive euthanasia is exercised only when a person is irreversibly dying and it's not against the patient's will. They've talked to everybody about it and they're ready to go, so let them go. Hard decisions. But again, we remember it's God who gives life and it's God who takes life. Let's get God be God. Let's take about a 5-minute break, okay? And I'm pausing the recording cast. All right, we're picking up on chapter 11 now. We're start talking about biomedical issues. Now, what is this? I hope you've seen as we've gone through this so far that you have the humanistic view, the evolutionary view of mankind, that we got here by accident, and that we are only here to try to perpetuate the human race a little while longer. Okay, that's what it boils down to. Then you've got the Christian ethic, which says there is a God in heaven that we are answerable to. It is God who gives us life. It is God who gives life. It's God who takes away life. And so you have, as we've looked at this all through this whole situation, you've got these different ideas all the way through here. Now, technology has created a lot of new ethical issues. Artificial insemination, where women who wanted to be pregnant never could, but now they can. In vitro fertilization, test tube babies, surrogate mothers, organ transplantation. We talked about it a moment ago. Organ harvesting, gene splicing, cloning. Now that's something that we don't really talk that much about, but it's coming, where they take cells and they replicate the cells some way, somehow or another. And then their ideal is that eventually that they could actually replicate an entire human being from head to toe. So all of these things now begin to talk about, can they be done? And the ideal is that science continues to advance. Yeah, it can be done, but should it be done? That's the questions that's involved in this. That's the questions that we've got to think about. So again, you've got the humanist debate and you've got the Christian ideal about it, the Christian perspective. So you won't find it any more other than biomedical issues. It is because ethical decisions are not made in a vacuum. What does that mean? Ethical decisions are not made in a vacuum. Somebody knows about it. Yeah, somebody's going to know about it, and you've got to have something going on for you to make an ethical decision. What is the ethical decision? Doing what's right. So you have a dilemma before you. Is it right to clone a human being? And the ideal is, and again, because they think that, going back to the humanist idea, that humans are here just to perpetuate humanity and to hopefully, remember what I read in the Humanist Manifesto, where it says that we need to perpetuate humanity until we finally get to that higher level of existence, of evolution. Of course, they don't even have a clue what that looks like, right? I jokingly shared with you a few years ago, or a few classes ago, and it still comes to my mind, that one Star Trek episode where supposedly these humans evolved to light forms, just little pieces of light. And they have evolved so far that it's there. You could hear them talk, but it's just a piece of light, a piece of energy. Okay, well, that's Rod Serling and all those other guys' theories about what it boils down to, but we don't have a clue what that looks like. The ideal of cloning sometimes now gets into the point where, okay, if we can take the cells, so I'm having heart trouble. So if they take some cells from my heart and start doing what needs to be done, then hopefully it could create another heart to where then if time necessary for it, it'll be a perfect match for everything. And once my heart gives out, then what? I'll have another heart, just get it started and get it cranked up and going again, right? But again, that takes God out of the picture. That's where you talk about this biogenetic engineering that's going on so often today. And there's a lot of dangers in that. And I don't know that they've really thought through the morals in a lot of this stuff. Some of this stuff has brought things to where we can live longer. But again, do we really know and do we really understand the downside of these things? And that's why when we start talking about cloning and some of this other stuff, this is where this comes in. All right? When we look at these two worldviews, Christian worldview says God gives life and God what? Takes life, right? The humanist says, no, there is no creator. So life is just here. And we can play with it any way we want to, and we're not answerable to anybody for it because, you know what, right now we are the high thing on the evolutionary chain, right? I've always read cartoons. And recently, some of my favorite cartoons, because the cartoonists have died or gone on, they've been taken over by some other folks. And so I'm now reading Alley Oop, okay, written by a whole other group of people than whenever I was 7 or 8 years old, okay? So we got different people writing Alley Oop. And so you remember Dr. One Mug, he was sending them into these time machines and they were traveling all over time. And supposedly, in the latest adventures of Alley Oop and his girlfriend, what's her name? That's right, I went blank, I can't remember either. All righty, but think about this, in the latest adventures, they've been put into a time machine back some time ago. When, are you listening? The highest form of life were turtles. And the turtles are talking. And the turtles are amazed that humans have taken over the evolutionary idea. And now humans are above turtles. And I'm like, really? Okay, now we've gone from Alley Oop the caveman to Alley Oop the scientific guru. You know what I'm trying to say? It's an amazing situation, but there's where it is. Judeo-Christian says that humankind was specially created. Secular humanist says we evolved from the animals. And that's why it's easy. Again, if we say a human is not a human, it's easy for us then to say we're an animal. So then it would be easy for us in that situation, using that philosophy, to sit down and say, well, a human is nothing more than an animal. So we would put down a dog, we would put down a horse, we would put down a cow. So then what? There it is. We say that God's sovereign, he's in control over all of life. They say human is in control of all of life. The sanctity of life is a key principle to the Christian, but the quality of life is the key principle to the secular humanist. Not the sanctity of life, but the quality. And then they say the end does not justify the means, and they say the end does justify the means. The humanist manifestos, as I said, supported abortion, euthanasia, suicide. They talked about technology and emphatically denied that there's any God in control. We need to extend the use of scientific method. And confronted by the possible futures, we must decide which way to pursue. They affirm that moral values derive their source from human experience. And again, I read that to you. And you can read it, as I said. Whenever you look it up, you could sit down and choose to read it. So, Paul Kurtz, who was one of the writers of the Humanist Manifesto too, says this in the book Forbidden Fruit. We, not God, are responsible for our destiny. We must create our own ethical universes. We should seek to transform a blind and conscious morality in a rationally based one. In other words, it all depends upon rationality. It depends on what? Reasoning. Retaining the best wisdom of the past, but devising new ethical principles and judging them by their consequences and testing them in the context of lived experience. So, again, one of these things we've talked about, as I said before, is the ideal of the quality of life. And we've already spent some time thinking about that. There's one Nobel Prize winner, Dr. James Watson, who argued that no newborn infant should be declared human. Did you hear that? Should be declared human until it passes certain tests regarding its genetic endowment. So you've got 3 days after the baby is born to put them through all of these genetic tests. And if they don't meet up to what their standards are, and again, whose standards? Supposedly the standards of the majority. But listen, let's think about this. Most of us, 99% of us, as a human race, would not know enough about genetics to know what would be the perfect genetic specimen. We would. Okay? Would it be the Tarzan? Would it be the Arnold Schwarzenegger? You know, what about the mental capacity? At what point should that be? Are we going to look at, you know, and I'm not using this in any derogatory term, but the levels of intelligence, the idiot, the moron, the stupid person, on up to the, you know, the person like the good doctor. You know, I usually see that on TV where his mind, he's kind of autistic, but his mind is so he can automatically figure out what's going on just by looking at you. You know, well, he's got some other problems. Well, you know, genetically, we should take his mind that's able to make those reasoning decisions that quickly and use those good brain cells there, but then what? Try to weed out those autistic things. You know, and we say sometimes the autistic things are bad. And you see, once again, what have we done? We've made ourselves the judge. I've met some autistic people that are very intelligent. And you would not know it, but they were autistic. So, you know, well, we need to take the best of them and wrap it up with these other people and the best that they are so that we can have what? The perfect human. But then again, here's this, what is the standard of the perfect human? That's it. You know, we talk about the ideal as we've looked at this. They say that individuals have sovereignty over their own lives. For secular humanists, God is not sovereign over life, humankind is. So, although most humanists encourage life, they insist they have the right to end it as well. Suicide, voluntary euthanasia are defended. Abortion is on the grounds of the mother's freedom of choice. Some would admit that the unborn are human, but others confess difficulty in knowing when human life begins. Okay, we had that discussion, right? When does it really start? Some claim that human life does not begin until birth. Others say it doesn't begin until a person becomes self-conscious at about 1 or 2 years of age. Okay, where, when, who, how, who's going to make those decisions? We have a duty to create a superior race. I would like to have done it, but I didn't have time. But I want to go back, and you can do this if you have a computer. You can type in Nazi films about the Aryan race. And they will show pictures of these women that were just perfect as far as they were concerned. And in the films, listen to the propaganda. I've watched some of them. Listen to the propaganda about how these women and these good, and again, all their pictures are all these strong, virile men and these beautiful women, and they're going to come up with the perfect Aryan race. This was back in the 30s. Okay? That was just, that's just exactly where he was going with this whole situation. You can look them up on YouTube. You can see these things. Listen to what they're saying. And understand, listen, this isn't nothing new. It's just, it's just maybe more brought out. And their ideal is we have a duty to guide the future evolution of the race. So you see, it's not that we're just here by accident, but now that we have reached this level of understanding and mentality, we now have the opportunity to get those perfect people. The strong ones, the intelligent ones. And we can do that by cloning, putting them all together in certain situations. We now have that. That's what they're doing, coming up with the superior human being, the creation of a superior breed of people. Doesn't that sound a little bit racist? I mean, honestly, doesn't it sound a little bit racist? Yeah. So the ultimate goal is a human being totally engineered to specifications. Kind of sounds like we're now becoming cars, right? We're becoming cars, or we're becoming something like that. Look at all the examples that's happened in the computer fields. You know, I remember whenever I had to type in the DOS commands. Now it thinks for me. I click on the link and I now have 16 advertisements for that particular item. I didn't mean for that to happen. I didn't want that to happen. And they get to the point to where you're sitting there and they foresee a day in the future where you just walk by something and you see something, and a television or a computer will be able to read your brain waves and immediately pull up an advertisement for you to buy whatever it is you're thinking about at that moment in time. Is that far-fetched? No, that's what they're thinking that's going to happen. All right? So in the Humanist Manifesto II, Joseph Fletcher believed that coercive or compulsory genetic control is justified in cases where carriers of genetic disease do not abstain voluntarily from having children. In other words, you get rid of the bad genes. Is that not what Hitler tried to do with a lot of people? That's it. The end justifies the mean. So it justifies the compulsory sterilization necessary to achieve it. Go back and look and see what Hitler did. Did he not sterilize women? You see, there's what it is. In situation ethics, Fletcher flatly states only the end justifies the mean, nothing else. Although few humanists are this frank, most operate on the same principle. So here's what's happening. The end justifies the means. Have you heard or have you been paying attention that some people are arguing that we should take some of these aborted babies and take some of their body parts and use them for, genetic engineering? Yeah. Yeah, they're actually thinking this. Aborted brain tissue from aborted babies could aid in treating Parkinson's disease. Stem cell research, but also not just that, but they can also take, their ideal is we could take some of the aborted babies and actually use their DNA and their genetics and play with it to the point to where we now have something to help heal Alzheimer's or heal any other diseases out there. Now, I submitted to you, and I really want you to think about this in this respect. This is where this is leading. There have been some doctors, and they have recently saw some doctors talk about that have kept baby parts. For what purpose? They will make the argument that we need to experiment on these brains. We need to experiment on these arts. We need to experiment on these body organs that they harvested from these aborted babies, so that we can find out what's good and hopefully rearrange the genetics in such a way or something in such a way to where we would then know exactly what would be that perfect human being. See, we're one step closer to that. Hitler decided he was going to do it by coming up with a master race, the Aryan race, get rid of everybody else, right? That was what his whole plan was. We're not getting rid of anybody else right now. Did you hear that? Right now, because we're not sure exactly who is going to be the perfect human being. You see, they don't even know. A perfect body that will fight disease, that will heal itself within 2 or 3 minutes after having problem, that will kill a cancer the moment it comes into your body, that will cause you to no longer need glasses, no longer need hearing aids. Our hair will not turn white or whatever color, that our bodies will automatically know how to handle all that stuff, that we could just live our lives beyond our wildest dreams, not hurt anymore, not go through any more pain. Man, it kind of sounds like a utopian world. It kind of sounds like, wait a minute, science fiction, right?
When you think about
them taking aborted babies and doing certain experiments on them.
Mm-hmm.
Who's to say that they're not taking full-grown babies, full-birth babies?
Yeah.
A doctor could tell a mother, your child died,
Mm-hmm.
and won't let them see the child,
Right.
and they could perform the experiment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're that desperate.
That's right. So you see, again, this, organ transplants. We don't have enough organs to transplant, right? So you need a kidney transplant, and you're in desperate need of a kidney transplant. You got to go through dialysis all the time. You need a kidney transplant. Well, maybe we can manufacture one. Get some of your genetics and some of your DNA and start creating this and create it into a baby. Think about this for a moment. As a baby is being formed in its mother's womb, all of those organs are being formed at that moment in time. So if they can figure out exactly what's causing that to form that particular way, then maybe they can inject these special genetics or get your DNA into that to where what? You will be a perfect match and then harvest that organ from that baby and solve the organ transplant problem. And you're sitting there thinking, you've got to be kidding. No, they're actually thinking about this. They're thinking about doing things like this.
Where are the ethics?
Huh?
Where are the ethics?
Well, their ethics is, again, this evolutionary idea. We've got to do whatever we can as human beings to improve the evolution of man. So there's the ethics behind it. There is no God. We're makers of our own destiny. We're going to perform and make our own humans to the best of our ability. We're going to be like the Star Trek, okay? I used to think to myself, there was a Star Trek episode, and I didn't sit and watch them, but the bottom line is I heard of one where Spock. You remember he was the real intelligent Klingon. No, he wasn't a Klingon. He was the other guy. But anyway, I don't even remember all of that. But he was sitting there, and he got transported back from the future, 2025 or way on down the line. You know what I'm saying? 2025 ain't that far away, is it? All right. So 2125, and he got transported back to 1980 something. And he said, "Okay, I need to talk to the computer." The guy said, "Okay." So Spock comes up and starts talking to the computer. And everybody's looking at him in 1980. He said, "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm trying to talk to the computer." Because on Star Trek, he always just tells the computer to do something. It doesn't, right? It couldn't do that. "What are you doing?" "I'm talking to the computer. It's not doing it." "This is a keyboard. Put it in, input it on the keyboard." And now we're to the point where I'm telling Siri, on the way over here, I've got a radio in my car. My children got it, but I've got a radio in my car. I get a text message. It throws up on the radio. So-and-so texted this, and they read the message for me. My radio is not reading my text message for me. And they says, "I'm serious. I couldn't believe this when it happened." And then it says, "Do you want to respond?" "Yeah, Siri, tell them this." And I just tell Siri what I want. She'll read it back. She said, "Do you want me to send that?" I said, "Send it." And I don't even have to take my hands off the wheel. So I am text messaging in a car without even doing this number. See how far we've come?
On Star Trek, Spock had a saying,
Mhm.
"The needs of the many outweigh the needs of one."
Uh-huh. And that's, again, coming from this. You see, this is the point I was trying to make. In the 30s and so forth, Hitler tried to play it out. Then you begin to see these same group of people who were in charge of education, who have been in charge of science, charge of government. They're taking these things and they're actually putting it into the curriculum of our schools and everything like that. And what? They're teaching. Well, it doesn't matter. You need to be more concerned about the many, not just yourself. Right?
Spock was a Vulcan.
Huh?
Spock was a Vulcan.
Okay, thank you. I needed to remember that. But you see what I'm trying to say. You see where this stuff is coming? And again, John Dewey, a lot of this is coming out of our education system. It scares me. It scares me. So they talk about using the advantage of aborting babies and using the live babies for experimentation. Growing fetuses for spare parts. You see, when you take God out of the picture, then what? That's justified. The humanist approval of certain biomedical procedures for the supposed benefit of the individual flows from bare presuppositions. If there's no God and human life is nothing just other than a higher animal, there's no logical reason to say they're wrong. Okay? So they make the argument that the quality of life principle is utilitarian. What is utilitarian? You know, we've used those words. What is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism. I know you got to remember all that stuff. That's the hard part about it. Utilitarianism is for the good of the majority. Utilitarianism is for the good of the majority. All right. Now, again, we get back and automatically we start, if you take God out of the picture, what is really the good for the majority? Is it for us to evolve into these tiny pinpoints of light? You know what I'm trying to say? The quality of life principle is a thinly veiled form of utilitarianism. There are good reasons for rejecting the medical form of it. What does the quality of my life mean? And that's the question we've got to keep coming up with. Is it the physical quality of life? All right? If we say it's the physical quality of life, then folks that are in nursing homes that don't even know that they're there, then what? They're not helping the human race any. And anything, they're being a drain on the human race. It would not be wrong to practice medicine on them or to do experiments on them. Remember Joseph Mengele in the Auschwitz concentration camp. He did a lot of medical experiments, remember? He was taking it to that point. What does the quality of life mean? Is it physical quality of life? You know, I'm growing older. I broke my back. My back hurts. So maybe now what? I need something to help me get better. So they're not going to quite use me now. Why? Well, I'm damaged goods already, right? And I'm old. I'm older. So there, you see, all right, so maybe it's physical. Well, maybe it's social. Well, that means we may have to get rid of all the introverts because most of them don't like social, or if they like social things, they have to go back and recharge, right? Well, maybe it's spiritual. Well, they're denying that we are even made of a spirit. So what is it? In what proportion? If there's a combination of physical, social, and spiritual, what proportion? So it's just a catch-all term, the quality of life. What does quality of life mean to the patient, to the doctor, to society, to, you know, what kind of the quality treatment? We talk a lot on the news now. Well, you need good quality treatment. What do you consider to be quality treatment? Okay. On what basis do we discriminate? Age, race, social rank? The questions that Hitler tried to deal with back here are the questions we're dealing with today. It hadn't changed. It hasn't changed. So, according to them, this quality of life idea is for the good of the majority. Secondly, they make the argument that we need to understand we're not the ones in charge of life. We still sit down and struggle with that whole idea of life. In me, that you might have life. We talk about it. We talk about life being how we live. And there's something to be said about that. But when does life actually begin? That's the argument that they make. I believe it begins at conception. From a living organism, two living organisms combined together that's causing that. So we're not so sovereign over our own life, right? God sustains our lives. We have no right to take innocent life. So let's start thinking about this for just a moment. Let's go back. If we use the evolutionary idea, when did life begin? Well, I'm not talking about from the abortion. I'm talking about if we go back and say this planet and we are people that have come to this planet, but they say billions of years ago, and they have to have the billions of years for the evolutionary principle to work out, right? There was the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
All right, now what does that say? Well, there was a speck of matter, and they're trying to say it was a black hole somewhere that exploded. Okay. And we've often heard the arguments whenever we've gone there, you know, the idea that the chances of the world happening by accident is like a TNT explosion in a junkyard, and it comes down in a new car ready to run. What are the chances of that happening? Absolutely none. But that's exactly what we have to believe for us to have life to begin with, right? So now, going back to what I was asking a moment ago, let us suppose for just a moment, just for the sake of argument, that it did start with that little tiny speck. And we're not even going to try to sit down and figure out where that speck come from. It exploded. And over billions of years, the gas content on the earth, as well as the closeness to the sun, and all the things come in here just perfect to where now this planet is habitable and can be habitable by human beings. All right. But you still got a problem. Where did the plants come from? Where did that first speck of life come from? Rocks don't have life. You know, rocks don't have life. Where did that first speck of life come from? Let's suppose that it did happen. Let's suppose for just a moment the universe here got here by accident, and it's a big ball of fire. So we talk about primordial ooze. First off, where did the ooze come from? But secondly, well, just by pure chance, these chemicals got together and formed life. By pure chance. I've got a better chance of winning the lottery. You know?
That is why
Yeah.
the evolutionists have a hard problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're trying to convince us, the people, that this way everything comes from.
Right.
But they're not able to prove it because they can't prove it even in a laboratory.
They cannot. And that's the point. But they take this as happening this way, and then they then say, okay, this is how we got here, so we have the right to make our own decisions. All right, listen, how did life happen on this earth? We don't know if you take God out of the picture. But we put God back in the picture. He's the one that gives us life. So now all of a sudden, I'm now answerable to the one who gives me life. I'm answerable to the one who gives me the laws on how to live that life. And so now that's it. So they have to get God out of it. So think about this. Number one, we don't know how life got here. Life was here before humankind got here. Read Genesis. He created the heavens and the earth. He created the plants. He created the sun. He created all of that stuff. And then in the final day, he created man. Right? So life was here before we got here. Without God, we don't know where life got started. We don't even know how it got started. And it has to be literally pure chance for these chemicals to get together and form and mold in such a way to where, quote, life began, end of quote. And that's what I said. I stand a better chance of winning the lottery of all 50 states in the world than that. So then, you see, life did not begin as a result of human activity. What gives us the right to play with it to the point to where we're making decisions about it and trying to make changes in the genetic engineering that we hope might make us better. One of the things I was taught years ago was the fact that a lot of times whenever there's a genetic mutation, it usually is for the destruction of the living being, not for the betterment of the human being. So again, if you have that against you, if again, there's no God and it's all nature, That's why they have to have the billions and billions of years for this thing to work. They're building this whole thing on that evolutionary idea. That's it. So we have got here. So now we are the acme of life. Now we have the right to make life the way we want it. Genetic engineering, etc. In spite of our medical advances, we cannot avoid death. All right, now let's talk about life. We talked about how we can't figure out where life came from. Number two, despite all we do, every last one of them is still going to die. Right? We may be allowed to live a little bit longer. Of course, we still don't live as long as the guys in the Bible before the flood, right? Still not living in that situation where Methuselah would live 969 years. But the bottom line is we can't avoid death. You can't create life, not human life, and you can't stop death. Humans have not created from scratch their own living things. We have only modified them. We take corn and the best corn, and we breed that corn with the other corn seed, and we make better ears of corn, but we don't change it from being a corn to being a broccoli sprout. Right? We can't. We haven't done that yet. And we won't, because we're not in charge of that. Humans cannot even make new living things, something totally that doesn't have life already to begin with. Where do we think we're going to make human beings? When we make human beings, when a man and a woman get to know, you're just using the material God's given you. You're just using the abilities that God has given you to make those human beings, right? So, there's no realistic prospect of creating anything like a human life. Even if we did not bring human life into the world, we have no right to claim sovereignty over it. We have no right to say we can control the human race. We didn't bring it here, so we have no right to sit back and say we can control it. And that's the point. There's also no duty to produce a superior race. In 1859, Charles Darwin wrote the book on the origin of the species. He then wrote another book shortly thereafter on the origin of the species by means of natural selection. But the whole book the whole book's title is this: On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. And here's the subtitle: The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle of Life. Now think about that for just a few moments. Adolf Hitler used natural selection. It was the Aryan race, right? It was the Aryan race. He wrote in his book, Mein Kampf, if nature does not wish that weaker individuals should mate with stronger, she wishes even less that a superior race should intermingle with an inferior one. Why? Because in such case, all her efforts through hundreds of thousands of years to establish an evolutionary higher stage of being may thus be rendered futile. He wrote that in Mein Kampf. Okay? Aldous Huxley, or Julian Huxley, who was the evolutionist, contended, in the light of evolutionary biology, man can now see himself as a sole agent of further evolutionary advance on this planet, and one of the few possible instruments of progress in the universe at large. So Huxley saw man as the business manager for the cosmic process of evolution. So we have now reached the acme. We're now at the top, and now we can start controlling how life ought to be. And you see, you think about that. There's no evidence, number one, that we got here by evolution. But you see, this whole thing has been built on evolution and the evolutionary hypothesis. Scripture and scientific evidence point to a God as the cause of the human species. Second, science, with all its technology and touted brilliance, has not been able to permanently improve even a fruit fly. They would talk about, I remember studying this whenever I was in science in school. They talked about genetic mutations, and how doctors or some of these scientists would be able to change a fruit fly. They took some of those genes of the fruit fly and they injected those things, and they could make the fruit fly green. They can, they can make the fruit fly's eyes brown, or they can make them blue. And then they talked about how they can make the fruit fly's wings shorter or longer or all that. But guess what? They couldn't make anything but a fruit fly. They didn't go any, and a fruit fly. That's it. And why did they use the fruit fly? Because its lifespan is only a few days. So you have to try to use it what you can, so you can go from one to the other to the other to the other. You can change, but they never could change it from a fruit fly into a regular fly or anything different than a fruit fly. That's it. So here we are. We're going to play around with humans, and we can't even get a fruit fly to go beyond being a fruit fly? Okay. Even if we could make changes in the human species, there's no ethical reason why we should. There's no reason why we should. Can does not imply that we ought to do it any more than is imply ought to do it. All righty? And just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should do it. My daddy taught me that. Just because you can do something means you need to do it, right? Of course, usually he's talking about doing something bad, but don't do it. Ability does not imply morality. I like that. That's truth. It does not imply morality. Even if we were able actually to produce changes in the human species, how would we know that we were better, not merely different? If we could play around it to the point to where we think we could have somebody with superior knowledge now, or be able to keep, or we can actually have a computer as it was in our brain, okay? I'm really out in the science fiction field now. But our brain is literally a computer telling us what we can do. How can we know that we're really any better off? Suppose, just by thinking about it, I was able to access with my brain, because it's a computer, everything Google knows. And I'm standing here and teaching this class to you. And my brain is a computer in such a way to where it accesses everything that Google knows. So as I'm beginning to talk to you about this, it accesses everything I know about this, or everything that Google would be able to know about it. True or false? Google knows a lot, but Google also has a lot of false ideas. Well, how am I going to differentiate between the two? That's where morality comes in. That's where ethics come in. That's where the whole ideas come in. So here's the thing. Since the end justifies the mean, ethic has already been critiqued, chapter 3 and 4. Ends do not justify the means. Means must have their own justification. Secondly, even ends need justification. Not every goal is good, even if it's highly desired by many people. The German race wanted, and they felt like, now a lot of them didn't, but a lot of them did, if we could just get rid of the Jews, that would solve all of our problems. Well, who told them that? Hitler, right? So that's the reason why they did that. So they killed, that's it. So if that's the case, then guess what? Well, let's take it to its logical conclusion for just a moment. I don't know who you voted for. I don't care who you voted for in the last election. I'm just using this as an example. Suppose that Donald Trump now decides that everybody that disagrees with him is going to be put to death. Why? Well, I'm intellectually superior to everybody else, and now it becomes what? If you don't agree with me, then what? I'm going to put you to death. Right? Number one, can he justify that? Obviously not. Number two, well, maybe if we do that, if I get rid of all those folks that don't agree with me, then what? We'll have a lot more unity. Well, yeah, you got rid of everybody that disagreed with you. And even if somebody's going to disagree with you now, they're not going to tell you because they want to live, right? So you see, but is it really for the betterment of the race? Are we going to let one man make that decision? Are we going to let a bunch of scientists make that decision? Are we going to let a bunch of evolutionists make that decision? See, there's where we come back to the ideal of ethics. Is it justifiable to kill AIDS patients so we can stop the deadly disease? Should we kill AIDS patients? No, because they have as much right to life as anybody else. You see, there's a lot of morally unacceptable consequences whenever we try to justify that. The humanist approach to biomedical ethics is to play God. The Christianist approach is to use medical advances to serve God. So here's the difference. If you're looking on page 185, this table, the Christian view of serving God. So here it is. You have the voluntary treatment versus compulsory treatment. All right, so this is where we're talking about. Here's the basic principles. So you have biomedical issues. You take voluntary treatment or compulsory. The compulsory treatment is if you're trying to orchestrate or trying to help along, and you understand what I'm saying, help along the evolution, then you will get rid of certain races of people. You will get rid of people that have mental problems. You will get rid of people that have genetic problems. You'll get rid of the people that have any other kind of physical deformity whatsoever. You'll come up with that perfect race of people, right? God tells us what? All people are precious. All life is precious. The autistic child, the deformed baby, the deformed human, the child with cerebral palsy, the adult with cerebral palsy. You see, all that comes in there. The Christian view of serving God, that we need to improve human life. What do they want to do? They want to create human life in their image. But you see, here's the problem. Nobody really tells us where it's going to end up. Well, I don't know what the end result's going to be. You have guys that design cars. That designs a Ford or a Dodge or whatever your favorite car is, okay? And some of us guys, we want those muscle cars, you know, that Dodge Challenger or that Chevrolet Camaro, right? Somebody somewhere had to design what it's going to look like, and then a bunch of other folks had to figure out how to put it together and make it work, right? Who's sitting up making the design of who the perfect human's going to be? Well, it might be another human. Uh-oh. So we've already got a flawed human trying to design what a perfect human is like, right?
So that means, for him to do that, he has to see himself as inferior.
Right? You see the problem that comes up with that?
Yeah.
You see where I just challenge this every time we're looking at some of this stuff. Whenever you hear people talk about stuff like this, just try to take that to its logical conclusion. So you've got an inferior human trying to come up with the ideal human, and we don't even have an idea what an ideal human is, right? So the Christian view of serving God, and again, my biomedical is repairing human life. Again, they want to recreate human life. Maintenance of life versus the engineering of life. Genetic fitness to genetic fabrication. We are cooperating with nature as opposed to control over nature. There's a marked difference between these two approaches. So we need to remind ourselves of these very simple things, okay? Here's some fallacies. Number one, some fallacies to the humanistic approach. What is being done ought to be done. There is a fallacy in logic. It's the famous is, therefore it ought to be done. Just because we are aborting babies does not mean we should be aborting babies. Does it? No. But they'll say, well, we're doing it, therefore it ought to be done. No, not necessarily, because we haven't really sat down and said why it should be done. And for the Christian, we say it should not be done because we don't have the right to make those decisions. So the ideal is the is ought fallacy. You know, it already is, so therefore it ought to be. So the argument could be, well, rape and child abuse is taking place, isn't it? Therefore it ought to be taking place. That's no. Murder is taking place, right? Therefore it ought to be taking place. No. So there it is. Cloning, splicing genes, harvesting organs does not automatically mean that we should be doing these things. There has to be some moral justification, not just because it already is. Secondly, if it can be done, it should be done. All right, so number one, what is being done ought to be done. Secondly, if it can be done, it should be done. That's another one. That's another faulty idea. Just because something is technologically possible does not make it morally permissible. Now, think about this for a moment. And I want us to meditate on it a little bit. When we think about war, and when we think about, isn't it interesting that the only country on this planet that has ever used nuclear warheads is the United States of America? On the 2 bombs that were dropped on Japan. All right, so, well, we did it, right? Dropped 1 bomb on the city of Hiroshima, flattened the city, killed over 100,000 people right then. And that's not including the radiation deaths later. So, well, we can do it. Does that mean we ought to do it? Huh? Now we sit back and we kind of justify that and say, well, if we hadn't, then that war with Japan would have lasted. It may still be going on to this day because they would have fought to the death, right? So we could sit down and talk about the morality of that and the ethical decision of that. And I think Truman at the time made the best decision that he could under the circumstances to try to save American lives. Okay, but is that what ought to have happened? Destroying close to, between both bombs, close to 200,000 people just with 2 bombs? Is that what should have happened? Is that what ought to have happened? No. But we justify it because, again, it ended the war. After the dropping of those 2 bombs, Toyo said, where do I sign? Right? I quit. We're done. We're not going to go with it some more. So you see, that's the point. If it can be done, it should be done. Just because something can be done doesn't make it morally right. And so we struggle. Technological progress is not necessarily ethical progress. You look at the technological progress we have now. I'm able right now to have and talk to people in different states right now because of the technological progress that we've made. And we're using it, or we're striving to use it for good. There's a lot of people that use it for evil all the time, right? I mean, no matter what you say. And so what winds up happening is you have, just because it can be done, should it be done? No. There has to be some morals setting up, some ethics setting up about what is right and what is wrong. The end justifies the mean. Well, again, here's where our emotions come in. Well, yes, we needed to do that. So what? Why should we not use brain tissue from aborted babies to try to deal with Parkinson's? Well, if we can, should we? Ought we? Or we're now, you see what's beginning to happen? Why should people be allowed to suffer when we have the means of alleviating it by letting them be put to sleep by morphine? Why should we do that? The ends justify the means. We've talked about that all along. Killing an innocent human being to alleviate the suffering of another is not morally justifiable. Some people say, well, 2 wrongs make a right. Never has. Never has. You know, it's never right to correct a wrong by doing something wrong. Adding a wrong to a wrong just adds to wrong. It just doesn't take away the first wrong. It just adds another wrong to it. Killing babies is wrong. It doesn't justify the added addition of experimenting on those body parts. If it was wrong to begin with, then it's wrong to continue to experiment on those body parts. There's no ethical obligation to know everything, no matter how we get the information. But again, what it is, they say that we need to, because of our ingenuity and because of our wisdom, come up with our own ideas and figure out a way to do this. So we come back to this ideal again with biomedical issues. When we start thinking about this whole ideal of cloning and all this other stuff, we got to remember, number one, God is sovereign. He is in charge of life. We are trying to play God and trying to be God by deciding who lives and who dies. And we make that judgment more often than not on what? Some subjective feeling that we have. Not not on what is fact, but on a feeling, well, this is the way it ought to be. No, not necessarily. So again, let's remember God made us. We belong to him. He has the right to tell us how to live. Secondly, the dignity of humanity. God said that mankind was the acme of his creation. He put mankind over dominion over the rest of the planet. So we are made in the image of God. I like what he says here. We are God in effigy. The idea is that we are, as you look at us, and as you see God described in the Bible, he has a head, hands, feet. He hears, he sees, he breathes, right? Everything a human does, God is said to do. And now we can get into that big theological discussion. Does that mean that God actually does all of this, or is he just a point of light somewhere? No, we have to take it from what's revealed here. We know that God became man in the person of Jesus Christ. So he understands now exactly what we go through. So there is that dignity of human life. He says, whoever says man's blood, by man shall blood be shed. For the image of God made he man. Genesis 9 verse 6. We have been made in God's likeness. James 3 verse 9. The dignity of human life includes the body, which should be cared for and even buried with respect, anticipating its final resurrection. The sanctity of life. Human life is both dignity and sanctity. The dignity calls for respect, the sanctity for reverence. We don't worship humans, but human life should not be adored like the Creator is, but it should be respected as one of God's creations. Humans are not God, but we are God-like. And we're to be like God, right? Isn't that the challenge of Christian living? Be like Jesus? Well, that's tough, isn't it? We can talk about it in our Bible classes. It sounds pretty good. Sounds pretty easy till we get out there and start trying to live it. And then it gets tough, right? All right? We are made in his likeness, so we share in his moral likeness. So we need to have that sacredness of life. The principle of the greater good. When two or more principles conflict, then follow the higher obligation. The principle of double effect. When an act has both good and bad consequences, it can be preferred if the act is good or indifferent, or if a good effect follows. So, the mortality of life. We need to understand what? Because of sin, we're going to die. So that necessarily means that I've got to make those decisions to the best of my ability as I could. We're living in a fallen world, and that consequence of that fallen world is death. In the day that you eat of it, Genesis 2:17, you shall surely die. We remember reading that again, Methuselah lived to be 969 years old, right? I don't know how they lived that long. I have some ideas. I think there's some scientific ideas to back up why they lived that long. But by Psalms 98 verse 10, the psalmist says that the years of our life are 70 years or perhaps 80 if we have the strength. And even then, and we know it, those of us that are getting older, time flies, right? Whenever I was 2 or 3 years old, I could not wait for Santa Claus. It took forever for Santa Claus to get here. Right around December, they'd put up the Christmas tree, and man, I'd be just in eager anticipation for Santa Claus to get here. Now I'm a little bit older, a lot, and it's just like, didn't we just have Christmas day before yesterday? And here we are again. What happened to this year? You know what I'm talking about. And again, it's a matter of perspective. But the reality is just because, as we're looking at this, we're all going to die. And look, all of our attempts to try not to die are futile. We're going to die. They talk about the population problem, and they emphasize the idea that, the earth can't sustain a certain number of people. They just can't do it, right? But isn't it interesting that that's part of the reason why they justify abortions? Well, if the earth can't deal with them, but again, who are we going to choose that's going to die? How are we going to choose who's going to die? That's where it leads us. We need to have charity for human life. Love is the essence of Christian ethics. Okay? And Jesus said our greatest commandment is to love the Lord our God and to love our other human beings as ourselves. That means we love the baby in the womb. That means we love that sister or brother in the nursing home that may not even know that you're there. That means we love the Alzheimer patient who definitely doesn't know that you're there, who can't talk with you. That means that we have respect for those people. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone through nursing homes and I say a silent prayer to myself, Lord, please, I don't want this to happen to me. You know what I'm trying to say. But again, I still respect their life. And I'm not going to go down through there and say, okay, let's round up a bunch of these folks and go ahead and put them out of their misery / our misery, right? Why? We respect human life because God gave them that life. So we need to remember that. Christian love is not selfish love. It comes from God who is love. So we have this responsibility to God to take care of those less fortunate to us. It's not a empty feeling or an attitude. It's fleshed out in specific commandments. So we love God by keeping His commandments. We love God by serving mankind. True or false, this is a problem we have in the church sometimes. It's all about me. It's all about what I want, right? What color carpet should we put in the building? Well, I want red. Well, I want blue. Well, and so we'll get into that and we'll have a knockdown, drag out fight over the color of the carpet. Why? Carpet don't matter. It's the people. It's the people. Again, I read cartoons and I may have shared this with you before and I know I did, please forgive me, but that story of that guy, that the old cantankerous brother that goes to church and somebody says, brother, why do you have such a bad attitude? He said, I thought you loved the church. He said, I do love the church. It's the people I can't stand. No. You see? So whenever we come to bioethical issues, we have to think about how God looks at mankind and what we need to do in that same regard. All right? We're going to finish up with these basic things, biomedical issues next week. Go ahead, if you haven't, study the capital punishment and the war chapters. I think I've already chosen that. So go ahead and go through chapter 12 and 13, and then we'll start going on from there. We don't have that much longer. We will be, we're coming to the end of October. We have 3 weeks in November because we're taking off the week for Thanksgiving, and then 2 weeks in December. So we're coming up. I know that I should have gotten out the midterm. I am working on it. But again, there's been a lot of things happen at South Cobb. We had one of our elders resign, so now a lot more responsibilities are coming back on me. And so we just need to understand, thank you for bearing with me. It will be coming out this week. Okay, I promise. All righty. In fact, I was working on that thinking, okay, I'll get this done. And what I was asking you to do on the midterm was going to be to tell me everything you know that we've studied up till now. I'm not going to do that to you. So I'm going to try to make it easier on you and me as we're trying to grade that test, okay? So thank you. Appreciate it. Y'all have a good evening. Have any questions or anything, let me know. Go ahead and prepare for the next week class, and I will get that midterm to you this week sometime. Thank you. All righty. Any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ethics, being a organ donor.
Take care, brother. Take care.